Okay. All right. Nope. Well, thanks for sticking around. I'm the only one standing between you and probably free booze, so it's very kind of you. My standard disclaimer. And so I work for a city-owned utility. I was at the presentation by the gentleman from Consumers earlier, and so similar work, but being for-profit versus city-owned. Obviously, we also want to stay in the black, but yeah, a little bit different. He did a great job. I was really glad to see that not all of his content overlapped mine, but first I want to talk about a physical threat, squirrels. Oddly enough, squirrels cause a lot of power outages. There's also some other causes. I just got an email from work. We had a major 3-circuit outage this morning caused by a bird. Managed to touch 2 of the lines on a big transformer, blew it. So it's crazy. There's also there's some fun media articles you'll see. I love this headline. This is what's called a handhole. Basically, this is where fiber optic cables are tied together, spliced, junction. There was an incident we had where a chipmunk found its way into this box with the lid on. I'm not sure how it managed that, maybe a vast array of tunnels, but multiple fiber outages. So one time one of our fiber guys went out there and he found the squirrel in there, and I kind of made me think, if they're using Nutella to like flavor the insulation, why would it chew? I think you could make a lot of money if you figure out how to make insulation that tastes terrible to animals. So if you're an inventor, my coworker had to dispatch the chipmunk, sadly, with a shovel. But so I found some pictures. I wanted to warn you in case you're sensitive to seeing dead animals. That used to be a squirrel, and one of the, if you see those green metal boxes out there, like electrical boxes, this was in a pad mount transformer, so you got a concrete pad, big refrigerator looking box, caused a lot of outages. It didn't end well for the squirrel, and it's weird too to see it without hair on the tail, because you're like, man, it looked rat-like to me. But website I really like, cybersquirrel1.com. They track as much as is made public outages caused by animals, and so you even have some options here for drop downs. So this was the last 6 months worth of squirrel caused power outages, and there's 743 birds, 321 raccoons, and underneath that you can't see it, but there were snakes, like 50 of them, because those can also get into those pad mount transformers and cross 2 wires and poof. So, and this is a map of known and reported cyber attacks causing loss of power, also in the last 6 months. 1. Okay, as far as known. So it's a little bit different, but I love InfoSec, I like security. I don't hate animals, but they cause problems. Oh, yeah, it said cyber. I thought I could make up some quotes of famous people. Just see. So what are some natural solutions to the squirrel problem? Birds of prey, perhaps. Maybe a bobcat every 3 telephone poles or so. Clicker. Literacy training. Okay, this one came to me one night, and I'm like, maybe it could work. Because if you could teach them to read those warning stickers, maybe they would not go there. Plus, I love that picture, so I had to use it. All right, so I want to cover some basics on electricity. As my disclaimer said, I'm not an engineer, so forgive me if you are an EE or know more about this than I do, but it just is helpful to have some background, some level setting. Voltage, electrical pressure measured in volts, current, your amperes or amps, the movement of the charge, power, the rate at which the electricity does work. That's usually kilowatts, like your meter on your home. That's going to be kilowatts. Energy, the amount of work that can be done by the electricity, and that's usually kilowatt hours for your home meter. How much is a megawatt? This is a widely used example. Just 10,000 100-watt light bulbs would take up 1 megawatt load of power. Also, about 800 average homes, or 250. Summer in Phoenix, everybody's got their air on. Chris from Consumers at the 2 o'clock prezo threw this up, but basically you got 4 main components for the electrical grid in the U.S. You have generation, making power. You have transmission, which is moving it from point A to point B, like from the power plant to your house. Distribution, this is where it gets a little weird, but distribution is the last mile, so to speak. So here here's your house or business, but what'll happen is the generators or the power plants come out. Power comes out, goes to a step-up transformer because electricity is more efficiently moved over long distances when it's a higher voltage. So they bump that up. Usually, on average, it's going to be above 100 kilovolts. Then, like you see the really, to me they're cool looking, but the huge metal poles like out in the country or between cities. Occasionally you'll have transmission customers here with a higher voltage. Then step down, bring the voltage back down because you've moved it as close as you can to that last mile, and then it's going to come down to what we know, in your house, 120 volts, 240 volts. Or commercial customers usually have 3-phase power, but I don't want to go through the 2-phase, 3-phase thing because I won't explain it right. So the power grid in the U.S. and Canada is divided up into 3 sections. You've got the West, the East, and Texas, which I find kind of funny. Texas is huge, right? But I kind of thought maybe it was just in case they want to leave the U.S., dissecede or something. They got their own thing. I don't know. Okay, so you have balancing, regional balancing authorities. This is kind of an eye chart. I also like this note, bubble size determined by acronym width. It's like, okay, so this isn't a scale here, but we're in Michigan, we're in pink section, and these are the regions that are managed based on how much power generation there is. So basically, making sure that each of these sections, which are interconnected across the country, each of these sections has enough generation to meet the demand and the load. And then next you have, okay, so I talked about the 4 components: generation, transmission, then distribution. The transmission, the moving of the power, that's actually managed and handled by usually separate organizations. So these are the different regions. I don't know what happened here, if it's like no man's land, but we're in the Mid-Continent or the Midwest ISO, Independent System Operator region. So all of Michigan and connected down to most of Indiana, Illinois, et cetera, that's the region we're in for transmission. And the organizations responsible for that, their job is to say, we can make sure we can move power more than one way to any region. So you might have 2, kind of like having a dual internet pipe, 2 different providers coming in, so that if your loss of power is going to be temporary before it gets cut over. Like where I work, we have our distribution ring for the city. It's 2 paths, so you have 2 rings that can each be used if there's a compromise in one of the others. So yeah, the transmission and the distribution regions are different. Let's see. So do we have compliance in the electric sector? Yes. So I love compliance because it leads to jobs for people like me. But and again, I'm not going to talk about how compliant doesn't mean secure and secure doesn't mean compliant, but it's well-intentioned. But how the NERC, National Electric Regulatory Commission, and FERC, which is the federal, after the 2003 rolling blackout, if you recall or heard about that, it was bad. Okay, it was a failure on multiple levels. I love this image of satellite view of the Earth. As it so happens, some population dense centers like New York are in there. But then lo and behold, I find out this image isn't real. There is no ISAT GeoStar 45 satellite, and the real images are much less cool, so I wanted to use this one, but warn you that it's not legit. Okay, real quick, history of automation. How did we get to where we are today? Big generator, I think early 1900s or so. You got the well-dressed man pushing the button, turning it on. There's no valves, no gauges, obviously no computer. Okay, fast forward, diesel generator. Bunch of dials, gauges, you got RPMs, voltage, etc. Local control, the generator is right behind it. Then, this is still analog days, okay, so all of these remote systems could be brought into a single control room. I love how they got the desk sitting right in the middle. It's like, how cool is that? And nowadays it's going to look more like this. And I don't know about you, but I think I'd rather work in this room than be matching shirt guy, there at this little table. But that's just me. But it is super cool. They got the wall of monitors. It's kind of like some of the Security Operations Center images you see. You're like, wow. Okay, so for the rest of my talk, I'm going to cover the components in an industrial control system. I'm going to talk about some of the challenges to security of SCADA and define SCADA, some of the methods to mitigate these threats, and the Ukraine incident, which I am totally obsessed with. I apologize. But so when I first started about 10 years working for the utility, this is kind of what I thought about when you say control system or ICS. I'm like, and I don't read any language like this besides English. But so it was all Greek to me, or Japanese, Chinese in this case. But just a note, this is actually a diagram of a system to deliver oxygen to an eel farm. And I'm like, wow, that's crazy. So IT has acronyms. So does the utility world. OT, you'll hear thrown around when they're talking about the difference between, like, whether it's a utility, power plant, et cetera, or manufacturing. You have operations technology. Those are the people, in the plants or on the floor at the manufacturing site. OT, so that's that. ICS. Oh yeah, I love OT. I saw this. I was walking around a college campus after an event. I was like, man, I want to use that. And then you read the fine print. It's actually occupational therapy, but acronym collisions, I think they call those. SCADA. I was at a utility event one time, and I heard the guy pronounce it SCADA. So I don't know if that's like the GIF thing, but for what it's worth. ICS, industrial control system, and this could be anything that has complexity beyond, a small space. I mean, it's in manufacturing, it's in automotive, et cetera, food production, nearly everything you could imagine that has to involve machinery. It's probably got an ICS. Acronym collision number 2. ICS is also the International Chili Society. Okay, so just real quick, some of the components of a control system or ICS are sensors. One of the better images I could find, even though it's kind of lame, but these are just some different things like this might be a temperature sensor, depth, pressure, all the things you can measure, or status, or state, if you will. It could be on, off. Then, of course, those sensors, wherever they're deployed, those have to talk back to some other equipment I'll talk about next. But like any other computer networking scenario, you've got all the usual suspects of ways you can make people make things talk to each other. So PLC is another acronym. Almost any industrial control system is going to have a PLC. Really, these are just little computers. It's got a CPU, it's got some memory, some like flash memory or non-volatile. What these do, these are usually programmed with a laptop. The vendors will give you some software that lets you write the code to tell this, I call it a brain, what to do, and it does it. Super reliable. This happens to be a Siemens. There's Allen Bradley, Schneider, SEL. There's a whole bunch of massive vendors in the space, but basically what you have is you might have a Ethernet connectivity, but then over here, and there's many varieties of PLCs, but here each one of these has a whole bunch of connection points for those sensors that I showed you before. So you got usually 2 lead wires coming in, telling the PLC their status. And then for the computer visualization of the control system, you have what's called HMI, human machine interface, which is basically the picture representing what's going on. So real quick, let's go over a simple example. Okay, you got a tank of water, you have an output, you have a pump input, then you have something that is going to measure, the sensor is going to measure the depth, controller, which is possible to enable or turn on or off the pump to add more water, or most likely they're also going to have a control on the output. But then when you're sitting there at your operator station looking at what's happening in real time, this is what you would see on the computer screen. So that tank I showed you, even though it wasn't a photo, but this is what the operator would see. And then on the PLC code, you're going to have set points that if it's an automatic system versus one where the operator has to control things, a set point could be whenever you get below 25%, start the pump. When it reaches 90 to 100%, turn off the pump. So that's a real simple example. Because the utility I work for, we also do clean water, water treatment, and wastewater treatment. We have what are called pump stations. Around, when you're driving around, sometimes you'll see a brick, kind of a nondescript building, 1-story square, maybe 12 feet by 12 feet. Inside of a clean water pump station, there's pumps. Crazy, I know, but then also what you're going to see is usually a cabinet on the wall inside there with the PLC in it, the brain, and then you've got some power transformers. A lot of the deployed equipment uses DC current, and then a patch panel of some sort, because all those sensors for each pump and each tank underneath the pump is going to have sensors that come back and are read by the PLC. Usually then that pump station connects back to a control center, is what they normally call it, like the 3 guys sitting at the table in front of all the screens. So you've got a PLC-like device in your homes. Anyone have a guess? Well, there's actually more than one, but what? You got it. Thermostat. So controlling your furnace and or your AC, basically you're an operator. You set this thing, you say if it gets below this temp, fire up the furnace. If it gets hotter than a certain point, turn on the air. And then when it reaches the threshold or the set point for cooling, like it gets back down to 70, then kick off the air. So that's a helpful, simple example. Here's an image of a clean water process. You've got a pump station coming into holding tanks, then there's clarifiers, and then they show you kind of everything that's involved all the way back to the control center. So I thought that was kind of a cool thing. Here's an example of an HMI for that diagram that I just showed you and what it would look like for the operator. The interesting thing is I blocked out where this is, because it was on a vendor and integrator website. They're like, look at all this great work we did in this area. And then there you go. I mean, so from an OPSEC perspective, that's not really so much what you want. I understand vendors want to have recommendations or, customer testimonials, but I wouldn't want our stuff out here like that. Oh, this is one of my favorite example HMIs. This is actually at a brewery. I was on a brewery tour. I think it was, what was it? It was Great Lakes Brewing in Cleveland. And there's the guy, the operator, sitting at a desk with us. And I'm like, can I take a picture of that? He's like, yeah. I shared it with the guys at the plants. They're like, that's cool. I want that job. You got the holding tanks and everything. And I just thought that was cool. So what are some of the challenges to control system, ICS, or SCADA security? Well, these systems are really important, and as you can imagine, or like Chris was talking about earlier today, you want your power to work. You flip on the switch, you want the light to go on. If you turn on your faucet, you want clean water to come out, not nothing and not Flint water, for example. But also, when you flush your toilet and the things that you have purged from your body, you want that stuff to go away, right? Okay? You don't want it just to sit there. So these systems we rely on every day are pretty important. I'm kind of biased, but yeah. And the other thing is, without power, you generally can't do water filtration or wastewater treatment, right? So it all comes back to that. And operations technology, or OT, they want that stuff on all the time. I mean, they've been doing the 5.9 stuff for like 50 years, right? IT, which is, my world, obviously, a little different. In InfoSec, we talk about the CIA triad. Some of the jokes are the OT, there's no triangle. It's just availability, right? And secondarily, integrity, yes, that's important. Confidentiality, it's getting there. This, because I love screen beans, I just had to use this again, but those little characters in Office. But so, the two worlds, the acronyms, it's like, really? What? Separation of the OT world versus IT, that's changing, fortunately, and that's leading to improved security and basically me getting along with the guys at the plants and knowing that I'm just not going to up and patch their server on Patch Tuesday, and then suddenly the lights go dim. Not good. Some shared knowledge and understanding, events like this can help a lot with that, just spreading the word, and then understanding what you're protecting and securing, talking to the operators. I love doing that. If I bring them donuts, it goes even better. Challenges, again, 24/7. Security is seen as a separate objective. They just want their stuff to work, right? The guys at the plant don't hate me most of the time, but, sometimes IT, we break stuff, right? I love this. This is one of the first PLCs ever made, and that's the team that created it. Before the PLC, you were talking all electric relays, electronic switches. So one box like this, and now you can fit it in your pocket, basically. It used to be a huge cabinet full of all these relays, click, clack, and not easy to reconfigure, right? Now you can do it all through software. Pretty amazing. Oh yeah. And someone, I can't remember who said it, but someone was talking about the amount of time that we use this stuff, right? Our power plant has some generators that are 40 years old. What operating system do you think was around then, right? Besides like big iron mainframe stuff. I mean, you're talking not a lot of computerization. And then the whole idea of 0 days, now we have decade days, right? This flaw has been around as long as this crusty old box. Vintage technology, you're going to see this stuff deployed now. It's 2016. When was the last time any of you touched a Spark station? Crickets, that's what I thought. Then the other thing that's kind of crazy, so less than 10 years ago, because I've only been in my job or at the utility 10 years, I watched a guy load Solaris to something from floppies after a hard drive failure. And I'm like, what happened? Did I get into a time portal of some kind? And then this is really cool. One of the more popular power plant control systems is from Westinghouse. This is their West Station. They made it just like a Spark box, so you could stack them. It's awesome. Literally a month ago, I come back from a meeting, and this is on my chair with a Post-it note that says, I need another one. And I'm like, what? And so this is a 9600 baud modem, and I mean, maybe it's not a total surprise, but in IT world, right, you're like, no, this didn't really happen. Yeah, it did. There are some locations for a pump station or a lift station is what is called the little square building to move the sewage. So I always was getting that confused when I first started working at the utility until one of the call center people said, Doug, you pump the water, you got to lift the poop. Ever since then, it's just been really easy to remember. So I was able to fortunately find an upgrade. So, and you can actually buy the Zoom 9600. So, I mean, these are in a location where you can't get fiber there at a cost-effective price, and it wasn't really a good location for something like, sometimes you'll see cellular modems deployed, or maybe cable connection, or DSL, but this spot had none of these, so they had this crappy old POTS line, and like if you tried to pick up the phone that was in that room, it was all crackles, because it went God knows where, like under a sand dune, here, there, and everywhere, but it works. So this is a vintage picture of one of the Westinghouse systems, and you might still, this was taken a while back, but here's the operator sitting at his desk watching the different HMIs, and the stuff works, and it's kind of impressive to me, the lifespan you have. ICS had IoT before it was cool. I like to call it the Internet of Old Things. I don't know how you'd say that though, like IoT. Some more of the security challenges. Some distinction has been made, design flaw versus a vulnerability. Some of the early PLCs didn't have passwords, period, to make changes. Okay, so there was progress made from that standpoint, moving up into, say, 10, 15 years ago. But then what would happen is the design engineers, not having a background in InfoSec, were like, well, let's make the password 1234. Oh, and by the way, you can't change it. You cannot. And some of the devices, when you would try and change the password on the PLC to make programming changes, they would actually fail. Not cool. Okay, well that's pretty different now, so that's a good thing. Authentication and logging. I feel like ICS security has matured a lot. If you think back to business IT and InfoSec, that's been a long path to maturity to where we are now. I guess you could argue about the maturity part, but irregardless, I feel like a lot of progress has been made, so I don't want to paint a bleak picture. Plus, as Chris from Consumers was saying earlier, the electrical grid is complex, so it's very difficult for it all to fail at once, and that actually made me pretty happy. Change management now for PLC code, they have change control or version control, check in, check out, so that's cool. There are firmware updates. A lot of modern PLCs actually have web servers. Well, you don't really know what code they're running or what version of whatever embedded OS. So now there's a lot more attention to firmware updates, which is good because then you can secure those. Obviously, you want to segment them and separate them, but also some of the PLCs actually literally have a key on them. You turn it to run-only mode. You can't make programmatic changes until you actually physically have someone turn it to read-write. So that's a very simple thing, but helpful. OS patching, vendor support for that's increasing. A lot of the vendors will tell you exactly which patches not to apply where possible. And honestly, most of it is mature enough that you can patch. You just want to be careful and test or wait for the vendor to say it's okay. A week later, after Patch Tuesday, they're like, yeah, you're good. Connectivity, Chris's talk earlier mentioned this. Air gaps are becoming extinct. One of the places you still will likely have air gaps is nuclear, because the NRC, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, they thought that through a long time ago, because you don't want an attacker or a hacker causing a nuclear meltdown. And sometimes I think too, as I approach retirement, I think, man, I want to work at a nuke plant, right? Because you got the air gap. But still, things like USB keys, those can move, sneaker net. Now, of course, the business users want to know, management wants to know what the power plant's doing at any given time. Also, the movement from a flat network to ACLs and VLANs, which is progress, and then now to more specific firewall implementations. And there's growing use of network security monitoring. I love this picture. I do not know what it is, but one of the guys made a presentation about unicorns and air gaps, and I wanted to use that. So just some other quotes I found helpful and inspiring. So, and network segmentation is huge. So it's basically applying InfoSec knowledge to what you've been doing on the business side to the utility side, and knowing what is happening. Who has VPN? There are solutions that will provide a one-way network path, like a data diode. Waterfall, I think, is the vendor who's doing that, so that's pretty cool, because then you know you're only getting a read of data. No one's, going to be Nmapping your PLC, because some of those will just fail if you scan them. But again, that's also improving with newer products. There's end-to-end encryption you can put in. Some of the oddball protocols that are in the ICS space, there's Modbus, there's DNP, and usually those are now encapsulated within TCP/IP. DNP3 is actually quite secure. That's the latest version. Wireshark can interpret Modbus and DNP packet captures and NSM, like I mentioned before. Some of the other things, NIST has long documents that kind of help paint a picture of what you should be doing. There's also growth in specialty consulting firms. I'm a huge SANS fan. They've got 2, and they're working on more ICS security classes, and there's a certification. So they have ICS 410. I was fortunate to get approval to go to that, and then the cert, because they have certifications, as you're probably aware, but there's an ICS security cert, so I got that, and that's kind of interesting. I think there's going to be a lot of growth in the ICS security space, so if you're interested in this stuff, there are jobs, and it's a great field, in my opinion. Standards. NERC-CIP I talked about. Also, Department of Homeland Security, the CSSP group, they do great stuff. Control System Security Program, this is their mission. But the thing is, they do training that's free. They have a 5-day, I can't say it's as good as SANS, but they have a 5-day training that if you're in an industry sector that this would apply to, you have to get yourself there. But it was really well done. There's, the last day, there's a red team, blue team exercise with like real equipment. They got a big water tank, PLCs, and people are breaking stuff left and right. It was really eye-opening. Kind of scared me, thinking about my employer, but ICS CERT is the Industrial Control Systems CERT. They'll track vulnerabilities in products, and Idaho National Labs, in partnership with DHS, does vendor testing. So the big vendors will send them their gear, and they'll break it and tell them how to fix it. So the disclosure is happening, and that's cool. Vulnerability assessments, penetration testing. They'll even send people out, and the thing with the DHS, ICS, or CSSP group, they don't communicate with people like NERC. Okay, so if they come out and help you do an assessment and how to improve security, they will take nothing with them. They don't document things, they're just there to give advice, which is really cool. Some of the threats that you may have heard of, Stuxnet, that was like, I would dream about Stuxnet. I know that sounds kind of strange, but I was so obsessed, wrote my master's thesis on Stuxnet, and that's how much of a nerd I am, but there's many others, Shamoon, Black Energy, that are more utility specific. There's a number of SCADA incidents involving attackers or hackers doing things. Not that many get publicized out for some obvious reasons, but the big one was Stuxnet. But this past December, if you had heard of the incident in the Ukraine, the power outage, I'm going to talk about that Yeah, that's just a great glamour shot of one of my heroes, Ralph Langner. He unpacked the Stuxnet code, reverse engineered it, and he did a talk. There's a conference every January called S4, just for ICS security, and I got to shake his hand last year. I felt like I was meeting Justin Bieber if I was like 12, because I was like, I'm never going to wash this hand again. But I did. Just want you to know that. So I don't want to talk too much about Stuxnet because I want to get done on time, but I want to talk a little bit about the Ukraine, because it was published right around the time the power outages were happening, and then I think for the good of the global community of ICS and security, they shared a lot of information, which, as you know, with breaches, when it hits the news, that's kind of a negative thing for your corporate image, your brand. But I think wisely they shared a lot. They actually worked with like SANS, DHS, other agencies to share information so they could unpack this. So NERC sent out this alert, and I love this. This is like government speak. Mitigating adversarial manipulation of industrial control systems as evidenced by recent international events. Okay, now the translated version, which is actually a much better report, analysis of the cyber attack on the Ukrainian power grid. Thank you. It's like reading lawyerese. But okay, so in 5 or 6 minutes, I want to go over how amazingly well planned and orchestrated the Ukraine attack was. Okay, so then, like most targeted attacks, this was not opportunistic. They did a bunch of research. Well, they found out which these were 3 different companies in the Ukraine, and their role was just distribution. Okay, so they'd get the power to your house. 3 locations, 3 companies. The Russian word, which I don't know how to say, oblenergos, but obviously the root word of energy is in there. So they discovered what kind of some of the automation software and ICS hardware and software that was out there. And then social engineering, eventually it's going to work. So they had targeted spear phishing emails that contain a macro. So this is where, like at work, I'm always like, you see that button? Don't ever touch that button. You know, especially email files, but anyway. So human factor, obviously social engineering, it usually works, but I am a believer in user awareness training. We do that at work on a recurring basis, but then you need prevention and detection. Okay, so once one or more people on the business network received that email, because it actually came from a generating company or was spoofed to, so it's kind of a no-brainer. You're like, oh, I'm going to delete that, right? I want to get fired. Once they enabled the macros, the malware was a variant of Black Energy 3. Then command and control out, pull down the malware. They gained persistence because, of course, if they closed one door, they wanted to have multiple external entry points from the internet. Then they started to pivot, kind of typical incident analysis. You know, they're seeing what they can get to. They're mapping the network. They were able to harvest credentials. They found that there was a VPN into the control system network, which it happens. The vendor wants to get in. They analyze the software. All 3 of these companies had different software. So I mean, this was not your 3 teenagers in the basement going, let's turn off the power in the Ukraine. That'd be awesome. You know, not that. The dwell time is estimated to have been 6 months, which it isn't that terrible. Obviously, you want that to be more like 15 minutes, but okay, a lot of time and effort. They also believe they had a test lab, you know, and maybe not the actual equipment like the breakers, the transformers, etc., but they had the software, and they were able to look at what was happening, how these companies did what they did, put in some remote access Trojans, and then there's another piece of malware called KillDisk, which is just kind of a nuke it kind of a thing they used. But again, it wasn't about the malware. It was about how well planned this was. There's so many pieces to it. Attributions always gets a lot of attention. It's fascinating. It's, you know, kind of the spy versus spy angle, but I'm not sure it matters that much. But it probably was Russia, just like Stuxnet probably was the U.S. and Israel. But you can learn from it no matter what. Okay, so V-Day, they pressed the big red button, December 23, around 3:30 p.m. Most of this information, just so you know, is from that SANS report, which you can find. It's public, and there's a really good Kim Zetter article in New York Times. Big fan of hers. She wrote a Stuxnet book that's excellent. So around 3:30, the guy's getting ready to leave for the day. All of a sudden, his mouse starts moving, and it starts opening breakers. Okay, that means power is going out. And he's like, I can imagine his reaction is like, what is going on? All of a sudden, his screen went dark, and he starts trying to get his password in to undo what they're doing. Well, they had locked his account. Game over. So roughly 250,000 customers were without power for 3 to 6 hours. So the outage actually didn't last that long, and that's a good thing. It's, again, not to talk too much about attribution because it's all speculation anyway, unless you catch the people involved. But it's believed it was really just hey, we could own you, and we're just going to kill power, just kind of like sending a message. But it's a pretty serious message. Also in the winter, if they had wrecked a whole bunch of stuff, you think, well, how are you going to heat your home, right, without power? So it could have been much, much worse. Sucker Punch, they found network accessible UPSs, and they weren't locked down, like the browser interface. So they scheduled in phase, like 30 minutes after they cut the power, the UPSs went off. So your computers go off in your control center. As a guy that I used to work for used to say, is a total dick move. But brilliant. You have to admire the planning. Okay. Then, this blows my mind too. You see a lot of field devices, sensors are serial, so you convert that to Ethernet, right? Serial Ethernet converters are everywhere in ICS. So they figured out how to brick them. So they overwrote the firmware, no comms, right? So you can click that button all day once you finally get your computer back up, but nothing is happening. So then you have to deploy field crews to go and actually manual override and close the breakers to get power back on. And I forgot to put this in here, but there were I think it was something like 35 different substations that they killed. And it's epic. Terrifying, but and very, very advanced. So yeah, fortunately, manual operation is still generally possible in most systems and configurations, which is good, right? Because you want to be able to go there, pull the lever, turn it on. But they had to go to each of those sites. And this is the kicker. One of the 3 companies, at least, they arranged to have bogus calls flood the call center phones. So when you call to say, hey, I'm out of power, what are you going to do about that? They couldn't even get through because they had all these calls coming in like, can you tell me how much my bill is for? And they probably just paid a bunch of people to make these calls. Oof. And finally, the manual operation continued. Months later, they still hadn't replaced like all the field devices because, you got all these bricked converters. Fortunately, they could still operate in manual mode. And again, I was really glad that all that information could be brought out. Like anything, it's a double-edged sword because it can inspire other attack groups, but, this was no small thing. Closer to home, recently Lansing's city-owned utility got hit with ransomware. Fortunately, it stayed on their business network, but it brought down their payment system online, and it also took down their outage management. Most utilities, like we do or Lansing does, you go to a website, if there's a power outage, it will show you an estimated where and when and how long it will take to get back on. But that was down, and I had a very interesting discussion with my boss's boss, the general manager, about how their general manager, which is like your CEO equivalent, he had to go in the media. He was on television. All of a sudden, I started seeing this article shared, or the information shared internationally, like UK, the Register, that IT news site. I'm like, oh, I was like, thank you God, this was not me this time. But that's like a really, really bad thing. And again, it reinforces network segmentation. because the ransomware did not get to the control system, thankfully. The future, I think there are going to be more incidents. I try to remain an optimist because I don't like to be sad all the time or paranoid. But I think the defense is getting better, and I think the vendors get it, and they're doing a lot. Like big vendors like GE and Siemens, they're really paying a lot of attention to security and creating good products that are secure out of the box. But there's a lot of work to be done. But it's a cool field. Hey, thanks so much for coming out. Appreciate it. If you have any questions, I'm going to stick around a little bit and then probably go get a beer. I think Popcat at 6, I think is the plan. So thank you so much. I'll also be here tomorrow. So, thanks.